Hello and welcome back to another Danny Phantom review. Today we are talking about the episode Reality Trip. Now this is another two-parter, the final one of the second season, the penultimate episode. It's pretty fun. So, the plot of this one, Freak Show. John Cryer himself is back in this one, and in this episode the big MacGuffin plot device is that Freak Show has gotten a hold of the Reality Gauntlet, which has these different gemstones that you put into it, and if you have all of them in the Reality Gauntlet, you can alter reality.
Because with all the Infinity Gems, you can control reality.
So the Avengers will stop Thanos by learning to work as a team.
That's right, it's literally just the Infinity Gauntlet.
There's nothing that sounds more nerdy than Infinity Gems.
It's true.
What's sort of interesting about this episode, it's literally just a ripoff of the Infinity Gauntlet, is that it came out in 2005 or whatever, so way before the MCU decided that was the biggest story in Marvel, which means that the writers of this episode actually had to be fans of the comics. As a kid, I had read a lot of Marvel comics, but had no idea what the Infinity Gauntlet storyline was. And so when I saw this episode as a little kid, I just assumed it was a completely original thing. But no, it's straight up just totally ripping off Thanos and the Infinity Gauntlet. And in Danny Phantom, because sure, why not, I guess. So anyways, Freak Show's trying to control reality or whatever. He gets into a fight with Danny and his friends. Sam's been researching the Reality Gauntlet and discovers that as long as they're touching the gauntlet, they can impose their will over the power of the gems. And so they do that, and they manage to divide the gems throughout the United States so that Freak Show can't get them. But during this confrontation, Danny's identity accidentally gets revealed, and so now Danny and his friends have to go on a road trip in order to find all the reality gems and collect them before Freak Show can. They can use the Reality Gauntlet to change reality, restoring Danny's secret identity, and stop Freak Show. This episode takes place during the summer, and so Danny and his friends were already planning a road trip to go to a bunch of different fun things throughout the U.S. that they really wanted to see. There was like this space camp that Danny wanted to see. Another episode that actually remembers that Danny wants to be an astronaut. I kind of like whenever they bring this idea back. Danny having his own like dreams and aspirations aside from just ghost fighting and stuff happening in the show, I think is cool and makes him feel like a more well-rounded person. There's a goth convention that Sam wanted to go to, and then there's a Comic-Con that Tucker wanted to go to. And when they're imposing their like will on the gems and trying to hide them from Freak Show, each of them managed to hide one of the gems at each of these different convention things that they all wanted to go to. And so we get a kind of fun road trip episode where Danny's a fugitive because his identity's out. They're on the run from the guys in white who are back. They also have to deal with the reality gems altering reality and changing things. But they do also kind of get to go to all these different conventions that they did want to go to, but now they're dealing with having to fight ghosts and stuff like that. Sam discovered you could do this about the Reality Gauntlet because she was like looking it up in some kind of goth book or whatever. This is kind of an interesting thing that they do a few times in the show, but not very often, and I kind of wish that they did a little more. The idea that because Sam's a goth and she's already kind of interested in the occult and dark things and ghosts and the supernatural and stuff, she occasionally like has books and info on different ghost things that they have to deal with. And I think that's a kind of fun role for her to have that they never really do too much with. It's almost sort of like how Willow helps kind of research stuff with Buffy and the Scooby Gang. I kind of wish that was something that they played up a little more. It also kind of give her more of a defined role in Team Danny Phantom. Tucker is usually able to hack into stuff or use his computer skills for whatever, but Sam is usually just kind of along for the ride. Like, they give her stuff to do for sure, but like, she doesn't have very many specific skills that give her a good reason to like be involved in the ghost fighting stuff. So that would have been something I would have liked to see more of throughout the show. So yeah, Danny and friends are on the run trying to find the Infinity Stones or whatever. Meanwhile, his family is captured by Freak Show, and they're trying to deal with the realization that Danny has been a ghost this whole time. There's some kind of nice character stuff here with Danny's family. It all kind of concludes with them being like, of course we love and accept you no matter like who you are or what you are, which is nice to see. But it's also kind of cool because they actually kind of acknowledge some of their flaws, that their main thing is being obsessed with hunting down and killing ghosts. And so like, of course Danny didn't come to them. He's a kid. He doesn't know that like that doesn't include him. And they have attacked him several times when he's in ghost form. So like that stuff I kind of like from this episode, but it's not focused on as much as I wish that it was. The main focus is on these like big action set pieces where Danny and his friends are dealing with a spaceship that's come alive, and now Danny's gotta fly it. Whoa! All this kind of stuff, which is fun. This episode is pretty high on the action, and so it seems to have a slightly higher budget than the average Danny Phantom episode. It's all good and stuff, but I just kind of wish that they had focused a little more on the interesting character stuff in this episode, which is what if Danny revealed his identity? How would the different characters react and stuff? Like, we get a really brief scene with Dash and Paulina where they help him kind of escape this like big crowd, and he's like, "You're helping me?" And they're like, "Yeah, of course. You fucking helped us a whole bunch of times as a ghost boy. Like, why wouldn't we?" And it's like, oh, I kind of like that stuff. I wish they had done more with it in this episode, apart from just basically that one scene. So a lot of really quick callbacks in this episode. Clearly they did spend extra time on this episode and try to remember the continuity and make it feel like a bigger, grander adventure than the average episode. We get a reference to the emergency ham. Sam has a line about how goths don't sweat, they simmer, which is a callback to an earlier episode. They bring back the Jack line of, "Oh, I'm gonna tear you ghosts apart molecule by molecule," which we've got a few times throughout the show. And here it actually is an actual plot point, which is kind of cool. Bunch of fun hijinks throughout the road trip adventure. There's a part where they're at the Comic-Con and there's this like girl dressed as a furry, and then the reality gauntlet makes her into a furry for real, which is just like, yep, that's just straight up a furry. The show was ahead of its time.
You shall not pass. So speaks Empress She-Wolf.
That may be the hottest geek I've ever laid eyes on.
Tucker Foley confirmed as furry. We get to see Lydia again, who's one of the ghosts that assisted Freak Show from the first episode with him in it. He had a couple other ghost henchmen in that one, but like, who cares? The only one with a cool design that's memorable is Lydia, because she has these like tattoos that can like come alive and fly off her body and attack you and stuff. And that's just like a cool power. So they bring her back, and it's cool. Jazz ends up having an unexpected connection with Freak Show, which I think is really interesting. Freak Show's kind of interesting because he's one of the only human villains of the entire show, and Jazz is currently writing a paper on ghost envy, a phenomenon that she's hypothesizing happens to humans who are in close relation to ghosts, where sometimes they kind of wish that they had the same powers and abilities as the ghosts do, which Freak Show totally suffers from. His whole life has been spent trying to control ghosts, and his pursuit of the reality gauntlet here is no different. And Jazz even admits that she kind of feels the same way, where she is kind of envious of Danny's powers and abilities some of the time, especially since her parents are so obsessed with ghosts that they often don't really pay as close attention to their kids as they probably should. Not that they don't love them or anything, but ghost fighting is number one in the Fenton family. So I kind of like the character interactions and the stuff with Danny's family. I think all that stuff is pretty cool and interesting. I just wish that this episode spent a little more time on that, as opposed to the like road trip action stuff. That stuff's fun, but like, you have 40 minutes, you might as well like spend a little more time developing the characters and exploring these different ideas. And the whole idea of the ghost envy and stuff comes back, and Jazz helps Danny figure out how to defeat Freak Show, which Danny does essentially by tricking him the same way that Aladdin tricked Jafar at the end of that movie. Danny tricks Freak Show into making himself into a ghost, which he does, and then Danny traps him in the magic lamp. I mean the thermos. It's the same ending from Aladdin. Danny has a nice moment with his family where they are like, yeah, of course we love you, no matter what. But then he decides ultimately to reset the status quo and erase his identity reveal and put everything back to normal. And that's basically this episode. It's got a lot in it, but at the end of the day, not a whole lot really changes. We get to see Freak Show again, which is pretty fun. We get to see literally the Infinity Gauntlet in this show, which is kind of cool. And they explore what things would be like if Danny had his identity revealed, which is interesting. But I don't know that this episode really justifies being a two-parter. It's a fun episode, but for what they do with it, you could probably cut down most of the action and accomplish the same storyline in 20 minutes. And if you're going to make it 40 minutes, why not spend more of that time focusing on the interesting character stuff? Danny's family learning about his secret identity and them having to come to terms with some of their faults as parents and as people. That stuff is solid. I just wish it was in it a little more. This episode's still really fun, though. Definitely worth watching. If anything, just for the fact that the Infinity Gauntlet is straight up in Danny Phantom. And that's kind of it. Just like a pretty good, solid episode. Does it stack up to the previous two-parter episodes, The Ultimate Enemy or Rainstorm? No, not really. Those episodes had a lot more interesting things going on, and the threats actually felt really big and epic. This episode is just kind of like a fun road trip adventure, which is fine, but if it's going to be a two-parter, I think I would have liked a little bit more out of it. One last thing. Oh yeah, this episode takes place in the summer. It's like at the very end of the school year, which is kind of interesting because that never really comes back or is addressed again. Timeline-wise, for Danny Phantom, there does seem to kind of be a really, really vague chronology of episodes. There's a Halloween one, then there's a Christmas one later on. We're now at the end of season 2, and it's the beginning of summer. Although, Danny also never really seems to age. It's sort of that nebulous cartoon world where Danny's kind of always 14. The same way Bart Simpson's always 10 years old. That kind of thing. I'm overthinking it. Just one of those things that I find interesting, as this is one of the only episodes that actually acknowledges the time of year that it takes place in. But yeah, they never like go into if he ever turns 15 or whatever. That's never a story, but who knows what would have happened if the show went on for longer. So, pretty solid episode. Not as good as the previous two-parters, but it's still a really fun time. We get to see Danny use the Infinity Gauntlet, which is kind of crazy and fun. And, yeah, that's about it. So, we're almost done Season 2 now, so we will see you next time with the Season 2 finale.
Fine. I'll do it myself.